And joining me now is Jasmine el Gamal, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and Deniz Sert, who is an associate professor of international relations at Ozyegin University. Ladies, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So, migration deal signed in 2016 dramatically decreased the number of refugees trying to cross to Europe via Aegean and Greece, but it didn't solve the essence of the problem. At least it seems like that. So, Jasmine, what's next for the Turkey-EU deal, and was it a short-sighted deal?
I think that there were a lot of details that weren't discussed in the deal, and namely, one of those details is it going to be safe for refugees to go back to Syria in the near future? I think that this deal was banking on the fact that it would be at some point safe in the near future to go back, and both countries were moving towards that. The problem is that we've gotten to a point today where it doesn't appear safe for refugees to go back to Syria. At the same time, the European Union...
So you mean this 2016 agreement is not working?
I think it's not working. I think there needs to be more attention paid to the conditions on the ground in Syria, and more conversations that are taking that into account, both between the EU and Turkey, not just within each party. They need to be talking to each other about how to make this work.
Right after the launch of Turkey's long-planned cross-border operation, Peace Spring operation, if I'm not mistaken, Juncker demanded an immediate halt and said the bloc will not be paying for this, as it calls, so-called safe zone. So do you believe there's a room for cooperation in the coming future? Because Turkish President Erdogan calls for an international donors conference for the safe zone. What do you make of it?
Well, I think both sides have to first stop this blaming game, and they have to stop turning the refugees into like a foreign policy tool. Because, every time they're discussing this issue, they are discussing only over the numbers, but they're forgetting that we are talking about human beings. About the deal, if you ask the Turkish government, the deal is working, but the European Union is not actually taking on all of its responsibilities because the funds are not received. Not all the funds are received. I have many objections to that as well. But the conditions, in my opinion, also the deal is not working because the conditions on the Greek islands are horrible.
Especially on Moria, right?
Especially on Moria. Also in Kos. Kos is, for example, one of the best cases if you compare to different Greek islands. I was in Kos in May, and the capacity of the camps in Kos was 800 people, and there were already 1,300 in May.
Wow.
Since then, we all know that the numbers have substantially increased. 50,000 people are crossing. So it shows us, it is hinting us the deal is not working in the sense that more and more people seem to be trying to cross right now.
So what should be done next? What does Europe want? They apparently, from Turkey's standpoint, are not sharing the burden of the refugees. It doesn't want this safe zone. So what should be done, Jasmine? Is there a coherent policy of the European Union, or every single country acts on its own?
I think, as you said, there is no coherent EU-wide policy on this. Every country has its different capacities and different thresholds and different public sentiments about refugees that they have to acknowledge in their decision-making. But the one thing that is sort of a positive sign in all of this, or a positive issue, is that all parties, I think, agree on the basic premise that Syrian refugees should be able to go home at some point in a way that is safe and dignified and that doesn't put them and their families into danger. And so if both Turkey and the EU can work from that commonality, which is how do we get them back home safely? What are the things that we need to do? Then all of a sudden it turns from a blame game between Turkey and the EU to working together to address the issues that are making it difficult or unsafe for the refugees to go home, including conditions in the so-called safe zone, including the fact that the Assad regime, which is the major problem and the problem that created this refugee crisis in the first place, is still there.
Is this true that the European Union withholds reconstruction funds so as to push the regime to have some kind of genuine political transition? Is this true?
That is the policy of the EU. That policy is that there will be no reconstruction funds if there is not a genuine political transition that is led by the Syrian people.
Thinking that such move would legitimize the regime, because on the other hand, this current manner could hamper economic recovery and leave Syrians in an enduring need.
It's a really tough conundrum, but if you look at the way reconstruction, and I've written about this a bit, if you look at the way that any reconstruction funds that have gone to Syria are being used, they're being used by the regime to reward people that have supported it, to push refugees from coming back to their original homes.
They are doing demographic engineering
right.
with the, reconstruction funds received from the donors. I mean, there is lots of criticism.
We're talking about the European Union.
Yeah. I mean, in general, about all the reconstruction funds, actually.
The EU has not given major reconstruction funds, but there have been some humanitarian assistance that has been provided. They call it early recovery, and mostly for communities to kind of just bare
like
minimum
cosmetic.
More just like basic necessities, not large-scale reconstruction projects. Those projects, because they would actually benefit the regime and allow the regime to sort of claim victory and normalcy, are being withheld in exchange for a political transition.
So in the first phase, Turkey wants 300,000 Kurds to go back to the safe zone, which they came from. Deniz, if the situation stabilizes and the safe zone is able to provide some kind of a safe environment, would the European Union change its stance?
Well, I mean, I think the European Union should start discussing the changing of stance, because whether the EU likes it or not, there will be a zone. I mean, there's already a zone. The question is whether it is safe or not. So to be able to monitor the safety conditions of this zone, the EU has to find a way of collaboration with the Turkish government, because otherwise nobody has access to what's happening in this place. I mean, as an academic, I don't have access. Most of the journalists don't have access. Civil society organizations, human rights organizations don't have access. So to be able to actually figure out
see the ground.
Exactly what's going on the ground, they have to find a way of collaboration, a way of monitoring what's going on in this space.
And I think there's another important actor here, just to build on that, because the EU follows UNHCR's policy when it comes to refugee return. So as long as UNHCR has not classified this area or any area in Syria as safe for large-scale, massive returns, then the EU will not support it. So it actually is in favor, or it works for both parties as well, again, both Turkey and the EU, to work with UNHCR to first create the conditions for a safe return on the ground, and that falls a lot more on the Turkish government, obviously.
Is there a will in this respect, do you believe?
From the Syrian side?
Both sides, from Syrian side, from Turkey, from the European Union. Do they favor this?
Well, just like, when we talk about the European Union, we keep on saying that it is not a homogeneous unit. There are 28 member states, like all these different interests. I think it is the same with the people as well. I mean, there are 3.7 million Syrians who are currently registered under the temporary protection regime in Turkey. Not all of them have the same interests, and not all of them are coming from the same region. I mean, basically, if you are coming from Aleppo, I mean, if Aleppo was home for you, why would you end up going to this safe zone? Actually, I mean, why would you consider it as a home to go back?
But Turkey, on the other hand, says, I mean, they'll go voluntarily. We won't be forcing them, right?
I mean,
right, but that's hard to believe. I mean, that's hard to believe. People, Syrians have themselves, many of them who have been interviewed and have said that they want to go back home. And, refugee return policy, international law dictates that everybody should have the right to go home to where they came from. And so I think it is a bit of a tough sell to have Syrians go back, like you said, to some other village where they've never been in their lives, if this is where they're from, Aleppo or any other city. So it's really complicated. I think your point about the will, I mean, is there a political will to actually solve the refugee crisis?
We'll see that.
We'll see that.
All right, ladies, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.
Thank you.